This is Conversations with the Citizen. I am your host, Tia Carol Jones. I'm here today with Morgan Malone, social impact designer and economic development practitioner. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
For sure. I am in real estate advisory. I've been an economic development practitioner for about 10 years. I've done a little bit of everything that you can do. I've been in neighborhoods and worked in nonprofits. I've run O'Hare and Midway. And most recently, I've been managing the Brownsville Lakefront project, the Michael Reese Redevelopment.
Great. So, what is equitable development?
Equitable development is so tricky. I think, when I look at the work that's being done across the city and when we think about how real estate development should be done and serve people, when you start with people and your outcome is the positive uplift of people in a community, that is what spurs equitable development. And then you have to start designing with intention, designing for justice and equity. And so equitable development to me are developments that serve the collective wellness of a community and are focused on the collective uplift of that community.
How does equitable development level the playing field for under-resourced communities?
If anyone has read The Warmth of Other Suns or Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, then you know that Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in America that also has a deep history coming all the way from the Great Migration of redlining, of using design and development and urban planning and resource allocation to, disenfranchise Black folks in Chicago. And so when you look at our communities, I tell people this all the time, if you look on the northwest side, if you look southwest, their north and south thoroughfares are fully commercial.
Mm-hmm.
The southeast side, where Black folks migrated to, are fully residential after 21st Street. So when you're coming down King in Indiana, we don't have the same space for commercial activity that folks on the southwest, northwest, or north side do. And so much of that is intentional design. And so when you look at these communities and you say, okay, cool, we need businesses, we need all of these commercial activities, where do you put them?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you put them without displacing people? Where do you put them? Where's the individual blocks with a little bit of vacancy where it can sustain commercial activity? And so it can be challenging to direct resources to communities that over years you've consistently pushed to be unresourceable. And now to try to infuse all this capital and do equitable development, you have to think about housing, you have to think about jobs, you have to think about sustainable jobs, you have to think about policy. Is there a network of nonprofits to help with all of this stuff? Is philanthropy brought into it? Now you need 30 times more to get one equitable development off the ground and have transformative impact because of all of these generations of disinvestment and design.
What are some examples of equitable development in the city?
There have been some good examples of equitable development that is also community-led development for natural environment, so whether that's trails and open space or buildings. So one of the good examples for natural and open space is the Inglewood Trail. Anton Seals and Grow Greater Inglewood and a coalition of community partners along with the city and Gensler have been working on this trail. It's about 3 miles to not be like the 606, but really be community-led, culturally informed, and really do the work that's necessary in order to have that nice green open space for people to bike and walk with their families in Inglewood. That's a really good example of equitable development. There's some other opportunities like the K on Medicine and Pulaski. There's a coalition of folks out west who are working on revitalizing specifically just that corridor and doing 10 or 12 different businesses for a wellness collective. There's been some developments done by Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, the Artist Lofts, and some of the work they're doing in Pullman, as well as some of the affordable homeownership opportunities they're starting to build. So there have been some between residential, open space, and commercial. We are starting to see people think a little bit more deliberately about doing more than 30 and 10% minority and women-owned businesses, thinking a lot about how you engage community authentically and then getting them involved in the workforce opportunities. There are a number of community-based developers, Lennox Jackson and Urban Equities, Bruce Montgomery, a lot of folks who have been working at this for a very long time.
How is equitable development similar to or different than equitable transit-oriented development?
There is an idea that if you are building closer to transportation, that's inherently more equitable because people will have more access to move wherever they need to move around the city. And if you put affordable housing there, you're combining a lot of things at once to solve a problem. What people discount is the full systemic response. If you move someone next to transportation options, but you don't change their access to transportation at all, I'm just closer to transportation. It still costs me the same as if I wasn't. It might cost me less time, but it doesn't cost me less money. So there's a little bit of when we think about equity, that's a shift in power dynamics. That's not just more access. That's not just more representation. That's how are you shifting the trajectory of somebody's upward mobility over generations. And so having access to affordable homeownership or affordable tenancy next to transportation is important because core economics would say one of two things. You have to pay more, get less space, have more amenities, and have a lower commute, or you have a longer commute, you pay less, you have more space, you have no amenities, and there's no in between. So the idea behind equitable transit-oriented development is to try to bridge that gap of more space, less cost, access to transportation, minimal commute. So, it's necessary, it's needed, but that's not necessarily the same as equitable development at large because when you're doing development equitably, you're thinking about the build, you're thinking about everything that creates a barrier to my achievement to get to goals, the community's barrier to get involved in the opportunity at all, and you're working with this ecosystem of partners to alleviate every pit stop of barrier in order to really ensure that there's a clean slate and folks can access the opportunity and thrive.
What role does anti-displacement play in equitable development?
That's challenging for folks. Does it matter if I build a building and it's built by Black folks and it's staffed by Black folks? Black people live in it, but Black people can't live in the area around it. And that's what we're finding is that the communities have been under-resourced. So Inglewood needs multi-billion dollars in investment. Even Michael Reese Hospital site, that's $8.5 billion, over 100 acres, over 20 years. All of these sites that are underinvested in, Brownsville has robust housing stock. Barnesville has a lot of things. It's still a multi-billion dollar investment in Brownsville. So if that's what it is in Brownsville, what is it in Auburn Gresham? What is it in Chatham? And now when you dump those types of investments into these communities, and the number one employer of Black folks is public service jobs, the average public service employee is 65. So we're not seeing that age old where people are saying, get a good government job. That's what built Chatham. That's what built Auburn Gresham. That's what created those opportunities. When we're telling everybody to go to the trades or do something else, and then the public service jobs filter away, those are the ones with guaranteed raises. Those are the ones with the benefits. And so now it's okay, well, what jobs happen after that? Service and retail. Service and retail jobs will never allow you $1 million home, a $500,000 home. But that's the number 2 employer of Black folks after government. So it's if you build something in these communities, yes, you need it. Yes, you should have always had it. But without policy at every level around cost of living, we're not going to be able to stop displacement in these communities. People think if you just put affordable housing, that's enough. But people pay what they pay on housing for child care for a family of 4, for health care bills, for college debt, for car note, you name it, transportation for a family of 4 or 5. So all of it starts to add up. And so it doesn't matter if your rent is $300 cheaper if everything else is still $600 or more. We're not doing comprehensive cost of living work at the state level, at the county level, at the city level. And so it's elections are coming up, but that's what people need to be thinking about is who's going to help me with my taxes? Who's going to say, within 135 miles of this development, if your valuation on your property goes up by this percentage and you're a long-time homeowner, you get an exemption. If you're a renter, you get a stay. There has to be something, especially for these multifamily buildings, who would easily just say, my taxes are going up, your rent's going up, why should I pay it? If we don't have policy at the state level to infuse capital incentivize, subsidize, reduce people's costs. At the county level to work on taxes, and at the city level to provide the grants for the opportunities. It doesn't matter, and so displacement is a serious issue that people should be concerned about. That's a valid fear, and there just isn't enough being done around cost of living to quell that fear.
Who are some individuals and organizations that are doing this work well in the city and across the country?
In the city, E.G. Wood and Dion Lucas and his work with Beehive, they just opened a location around 63rd and Racine with multiple Black-owned, local-owned co-ops as well. And so it's an office space, it's a co-working space, it's an architecture firm, it's a consignment and retail store, it's a little cafe, it's a little bit of everything. And Dion did that with shared ownership in all these businesses too. So E.G. Wood is like number one highlight for me in the city of someone who's doing this work really well. There's also some work being done around just design justice. We have to keep in mind that the world we live in and the circumstances that we're experiencing were designed by someone. So we have to design our way out of them. There's a lot of folks doing design justice work. Tony Griffin and the Just City. Deanna Van Buren, Designing Justice. Liz Ogbo, thinking about trauma-informed design, especially when you see people displaced from Cabrini and Robert Taylor homes and all of these other places. What happens to those folks, They're doing equitable development really well, because the key here is that when you're thinking about designing, you're thinking about the development, it's not just the physical building. It's how do you consider people and what they've experienced in this work. So like, when you think about a Cabrini Green or Robert Taylor, you hear a lot of conversation right now in Chicago about public safety and crime. That's a built environment issue. That's what happens when you have people whose sense of identity was formed in a place. Every first memory they've ever had was in this place. Their kids were born in this place. Their survival network, their child care, their communal network, all of them are in this place. And then you give them very little notice and say, okay, we're tearing this down. And now you have to go out in the world, refine yourself, refine that network, refine those relationships. You tear down not just the physical infrastructure, but the social infrastructure. It changes, it's a trauma. It changes people's brain chemistry. So when you do that, it's like you have to recover with trauma-informed design, because the folks who experience that displacement so aggressively raised kids. And so it's like what we're seeing now is a lack of social infrastructure that was directly tied to social infrastructure that was devalued in poor Black buildings. So it's those types of things where, like, when you consider equitable development, it's who's doing it well to rebuild, but also people like Liz Ogbo who are thinking about that and trying to figure out how do we solve for that, how do we create new processes if ever there comes a time where a place or space is being torn down. What do you do with people beforehand? What do you do with people afterwards? What type of case management do you provide? And do you see this as a trauma-informed process?
That's a very good point. What, in your opinion, needs to also be considered when it comes to equitable development?
That you really need an impact ecosystem that has to be invested in. It's not just the building. I need strong nonprofits in these communities. Because if I say, okay, cool, we're going to do 65%, minority contracting, who is the Black contracting organization that is doing back-of-house support, that's helping people with bonding and insurance, that's helping people with, accounting, legal, you name it? Who's helping these businesses scale? Who's doing business development? Because I could say 65%, but I still have to find these businesses. They still have to be ready for the opportunity. People think that it's like a waste of money to invest in cultural institutions and nonprofits, and then nonprofits are forced to be in this cycle with grants, with philanthropy. But without that infrastructure at scale that's been invested in, I have no help to actualize any goal that I set. So even when I say I'm going to do workforce, who's training the workforce? Who's paying for the certifications? Where's the partnership with the city colleges? Where's the partnership with these certification associations? All of that stuff has to happen. Private markets don't pay for that. So that's not something that your capital markets or private equity team is going to pay for. That's something philanthropy pays for. So if you don't have a partnership with philanthropy, a partnership with these nonprofits, a partnership with government, everyone has a role to play that's more than what they're currently giving, and it needs to be done in a coordinated way. So that is currently like one of the biggest barriers to equitable development all over the city, is that lack of coordination, is that lack of playing off of one another, maximizing each other's resources. If the city does a program where they're going to build, 10 new buildings, okay, cool. Are we planning around where those buildings are, how they're connected to resources that are currently in the community? Are we asset mapping? Are we saying here's where folks are going to be able to have fun, here's where people are going to be able to do businesses, and so while I plan for this residential building, I also need to plan for these two other things to try to be in proximity within a couple of years too. That coordination just does not happen. And so you see it across departments at the city. Philanthropy doesn't really work with government. Good developers wouldn't know to work with philanthropy. Government is barely coordinating across their own departments, and we're trying to get massive transformative change done and can't work without that infrastructure.
Where can people go to find out more about equitable development?
I would go to Deanna Van Buren's website around designing justice. I would go to Tony Griffin's website around the Just City, because that'll give people a primer to just imagine new possibilities. There's also Seattle has a redevelopment authority called the Case Association, Case Agency, and they do community-led developments, and it's a partnership between a chartered authority through government and the community to be able to do community-led developments. There's some really good case studies coming out of Seattle, but there's also just a lot of other work happening in other cities. We are, I would say, I know it might be controversial, we are behind in economic development infrastructure in Chicago. I know that we have Invest Southwest, and it's like, well, we gave the investment, but that's not what it is. Like, that's not an economic development platform. That's, a capital investment, but there's so much work to be done. And economic development is complex. People just say, like, we want to create jobs. So as long as you can get a development going, you don't care how much the jobs pay, you don't care what the jobs do, you just, anything, to like, say you did something. We need a comprehensive economic development plan. So those are places I would say are doing really good work, and at a minimum thinking about it to help you imagine more.
Okay. Great. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like our audience to know?
I think the key here is just to stay involved. There's so many things happening all over the city at any given time, whether that's new developments in your community, whether your alderman is doing a constituent services night and telling you about them, whether you're looking at them at City Hall getting approved through committees. There's so much happening right before our eyes, and so many of us don't know about it at all. And it can be challenging to weed through the city websites and try to jump through hoops and find this information. But if you can get involved and find a community group in your neighborhood that is like really involved. So like for Inglewood, it's Teamwork Inglewood. For Auburn Gresham, it's Auburn Gresham CDC, QCDC in Bronzeville, or MS Bar, Bronzeville Chamber, Bright Star. There's a lot of different organizations across the South Sides and the West Sides who are thinking about this and are at a minimum tapped in with their local aldermen to know what's coming. At a minimum, the organizations know what's coming. And so if you could just go to one meeting a month or one meeting a quarter just to get up to date on what's coming on your block, that'd be helpful.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I almost forgot. The vacant lot program is open right now.
Oh, okay.
So if people want to purchase vacant lots from the city of Chicago, now is the time to do that. That's available on the city website. Applications are going through February, but if you have an adjacent lot, if you want to do a play space on your lot, a community garden on your lot, or get a lot for future affordable housing or a single family home, now is the time to purchase a cheap lot from the city.
Thank you for that information, and thank you so much for being here.
Remember to make plans to join us again next week for Conversations with the Citizen, the place where real news can be heard.